Today we're going to talk about video game preservation and how it's come under attack over the past 20 years. Ever since the introduction of digital game distribution, the creation of Steam, and eventually it becoming a mainstream thing on the consoles with the Xbox Store and PlayStation Store, as well as the rise of live service games where the game is fundamentally changed over time to the point where the original experience is no longer there for you. You can't play the game the way it originally was. You can only play it as it is on the latest update. For some games, it's not really that big of a deal, but other games, I can think of Destiny 2 as a great example, where they literally took so much of the story content out of the game to replace it with other stuff. But yeah, there's just like so much content that gets taken out, not just taken in with these live service games. You have a lot of games that don't succeed and the servers have to get taken down, or maybe the game is successful, but it's been like 10 years, so the game developers and publishers don't see a point in keeping the servers up, so the game gets shut down and basically is gone forever if it's an online game. So we're going to talk about all that today and why it's such a very important thing to me. I believe that game preservation is the most important issue in the games industry currently. That's my opinion, at least. And I'll actually start by talking about that. You know, in life, there's so many things that die, whether it's friends, family, pets, your favorite place that you used to go to when you were a kid, you know, like a restaurant or something like that, going out of business. And it's just, you know, through life, so many things change, and a lot of the time it's not for the better. And I'm just someone that has a very hard time dealing with loss and losing something forever, like knowing that it's gone forever and it won't come back. It's obviously a much bigger thing when it comes to people and even my dogs than it would be for video games. But I think that video games is definitely the hobby that has had the most impact on my life. So it's very important to me when I hear about a game that's going to be permanently shut down, or you can no longer buy it on the digital storefront because the license expired. It's a very tough pill to swallow for me, especially when it comes to game servers shutting down, because if it's an online game that I played so much when I was a kid, it's always nice to go back to it and it kind of reminisce about how life was when I was younger, and I just love how that one experience is constant throughout my life, whether it's playing Modern Warfare 2, which I played since I was like 11 years old, or Red Dead Redemption. That's one of my favorite multiplayers to come back to. I remember getting that in the 7th grade. Like, I just like it when those experiences are preserved and they don't go away and they're just always there for you. I'm very upset about EA's decision to shut down the servers for Battlefield Bad Company 1 and Battlefield 1943. They're also doing Bad Company 2. They're shutting that game down as well at the end of the year. But at least there's the PC version, which has custom servers and custom clients, so I'm less upset about that. Unfortunately, 1943 and Bad Company 1 do not have a PC version. It was only released on the 360 and PlayStation 3, so restoring the servers for a game that's console only, especially a very, very old console, it's quite difficult, and I don't know if it'll ever be possible. And then when you talk about the rise of digital media over physical, yeah, physical media still exists on the PlayStation and Xbox, but it's become a lot less adopted to the point where there are a lot of AAA games now that are digital only. There is no physical release. So physical media is all but dead in 2023, especially PC. It died a long time ago. And even though digital distribution has a lot of benefits, the convenience is one thing. I mean, who the hell wants to go to GameStop? That place is shit. And even ordering on Amazon, like, it's just, you get the game instantaneously if you buy it digitally. I'll be honest, I bought a lot of digital games over the years. Obviously, I am mainly a PC gamer, so I am contributing to the problem, I guess. But even on console, like on the PS4, all the games I bought were digital pretty much. All the games I bought on Xbox One were digital, because I just preferred being able to buy the games online compared to having to deal with a physical disc that could get scratched or lost, because I have lost so many games over the years, especially on the PS2 and PS3, due to damaged discs and just losing it and not knowing where it went, like accidentally putting it in the wrong case or not putting it in a case at all and just having discs all over. Yeah, I was pretty bad at taking care of my games, so that was my own fault, but I'm just like, screw it. I don't have to worry about it at all if I just buy it all digitally. But when you rely entirely on digital media, you are basically at the mercy of these game publishers. They can decide, we are not going to be selling this game anymore. Like Soul Calibur 5, they just announced that that game's going to be delisted on PS3 and 360, which thankfully physical copies of those games do exist, But the DLC is a different story. You know, fighting games rely so much on DLC. So with all that DLC content also being delisted, unless you already purchased it before, you will never again be able to experience the full game and all the content it has to offer. I always had a problem with that when it came to the WWE games, where I purchased the DLC, but something happened to it, or, you know, I get a different version of the game on a different console, and I am shit out of luck, basically, because the game is delisted and is no longer being sold. It's usually like every 2 years or so, whether it's WWE, Madden, NBA, that the game is delisted and you can no longer buy it unless you have a physical version. So that's an issue, that even if you have a physical copy, if a game also had DLC, but the DLC is no longer sold, then you're going to be missing out on a lot of content, and the full game is not preserved as a result. Minecraft Story Mode is another game that has a problem like this, where the game was delisted because Telltale Games shut down. I know they're back now, but they're basically a different company, and they do not have the rights to Minecraft. I don't know why Microsoft didn't just decide to relist the game themselves, because obviously they own Minecraft and they could do that, but they haven't, so I don't know what the legality and why it's delisted. But Minecraft Story Mode, you know, I was pleasantly surprised by that game. I'm like, oh my god, like, when that game was announced, like, it was a really bad meme. It's like, really? Like, Telltale is doing a Minecraft? Like, what? But I ended up actually really having a good time with it. And even though I have a digital version of it and not the physical version, since I have it, I can re-download all of it. But the game had DLC, so it had the first 5 episodes, which was considered the base game. Then there was episodes 6, 7, and 8, which were basically add-on episodes. I found out that if you actually have a physical copy of the game, like if you just bought it for the first time, and, you know, it's supposed to include all the DLC, but you actually can't access it, even with the physical game. And Game of Thrones, the Telltale Game of Thrones, is another one where for some reason you can't access episode 4. So it's like, even with physical media still existing and being able to still preserve these games in some right, the reliance on online servers for these physical games is a problem. It's like if Activision decided to delist the Spyro Reignited trilogy, if you have the PS4 or Xbox One version physically, it only gives you the first game on disc. The other 2 games, Spyro 2 and Spyro 3, require an internet connection in order to download. But a lot of times when the game is delisted from the digital storefront, it gives you a lot of problems downloading all the content, even if you have it physically. So that's another big issue. And the lack of backwards compatibility in recent years has also done a lot of damage to video game preservation. Obviously, with the Xbox One, they added in backwards compatibility for the Xbox 360 like halfway through the One's life cycle. I think it was like 2016 or 2017 that they started to implement that. The problem, though, is that although it's a lot better than having zero backwards compatibility, it's nothing compared to how backwards compatibility used to be, where if you had the disc, you had the game, basically. It didn't matter what game it was or anything like that. Like, all the PS1 games were backwards compatible on PS2. All the PS2 games, for the most part, aside from the iToy games and some of those stuff, they were all backwards compatible on the OG fat PS3. Same thing with the original Xbox games. The vast majority of them are playable on the Xbox 360, but from the 360 to the Xbox One, since they changed their approach when it came to backwards compatibility, instead of, like with the 360, basically having an original Xbox inside the 360 so you can play it natively, the PS3 had a PS2 built into it, essentially, so it was hardware backwards compatibility. With the Xbox One, though, they achieved backwards compatibility through emulation, which, you know, in a lot of ways, like, the emulation works fine. A lot of games actually run and look better on the Xbox One and Xbox Series X. For example, Red Dead Redemption 1 is running at 4K on the Series X. It's still 30 frames per second, though, so it's not that much of a game changer, but still, you know, there's some games that, from the 360 to the One, they run faster, sometimes they look better, and they're just a better experience. So the emulation technology is great. The big problem, though, with that approach is that not every disc ran on the Xbox One. Not every 360 game could just be played on the Xbox One, even though it was emulation, and all the games could theoretically be ran through that emulator. The way it is, though, because it's software and not a native hardware thing, the legality is a lot different when it came to backwards compatibility where if you had a disc of a game that was not supported, that was not being sold digitally anymore, or if the company just did not want to make it backwards compatible, they did not want the game to be available on the Xbox One, even though they had it on 360, then the game could not be played. In order for a 360 game to be part of the Xbox One backwards compatibility program, the publisher of said game had to approve it to be backwards compatible. So that is what happened when it came to a lot of games that had their license expire. In the case of like pretty much every sports game, none of those are backwards compatible. Soul Calibur 4 and Soul Calibur 5, not backwards compatible. Pretty much any game that had licensed music, like the Guitar Hero series, and it probably wouldn't work anyway because of the peripherals, probably wouldn't have been backwards compatible. Ninja Gaiden 2, Nier, Transformers games, like all the movie tie-in games were also not playable through backwards compatibility. The biggest crime of them all, though, is that the Burger King games, like Sneak King, are not backwards compatible, and that's just completely unacceptable to me. Gotten to a point where there's so many games that I want to play, but since I no longer own an Xbox 360 and I only have the Xbox One, I can't play it. So I actually have to go out and buy an original 360 again, which they're still relatively cheap these days, but I'm sure eventually that's going to change as time goes on. Consoles are going to die. That's just like, it's harder to preserve games when you have to rely on the original hardware, you know? And you don't have newer hardware to be able to play them. It was even worse with the PS3 because there is no backwards compatibility at all for PS3 games on PS4 or PS5, probably because of how the architecture is just so complex and it would be rather challenging, and Sony just doesn't want to be bothered. So it's even worse when it comes to PlayStation and preserving those games, because there are a lot of amazing games on the PS3. There are so many. Way more than the 360, in my opinion. And obviously, backwards compatibility will get a lot better over the years. I mean, it already has with, you know, PS4 to PS5, Xbox One to Series X, because the architecture is now so similar between the consoles and likely will continue to be that way for the PlayStation 6 and whatever the Xbox after the Series X will be called. So in some ways, I guess backwards compatibility is improving, but preserving older games from older generations that are not part of the backwards compatibility program on Xbox and especially on PlayStation, because it only goes to PS4. Thank God for emulators, that's all I'll say. If it weren't for Dolphin and PCSX2 and all of these emulators, then there would be so many games that would be lost in time, really. And to be fair, there is a PS3 emulator, RPCS3, and Xenia, which is the Xbox 360 emulator, but still has a long way to go. Most games are not playable through the emulator for PS3 and 360, and who knows if and when they ever will be, because emulating those consoles is a lot more complex than what it was for the PS2 and GameCube. And the one good thing about piracy being easier on PC is if a game gets lost and it gets delisted or something happens, then it can still be preserved. Like with Battlefield 2, Battlefield 2142, and 1942, I'm running cracked versions for that because I have no way to play them otherwise. The EA took them down. They took down the servers and they delisted the game, but it's going to get more challenging the more advanced DRM gets, because there are some games that are no longer purchasable on PC, but the DRM is so tough to crack that there's no way to play it these days, even just single player games, never mind online multiplayer. And with online multiplayer, even though a lot of servers for shut down games on the PS2 and the PS3 have been restored, not all of them, not even close. So, you know, there's still a lot of games that are gone forever and probably will stay that way. And this generation will probably be the complete collapse of all physical media for consoles, because seems like most people purchase the digital-only versions of the Xbox and PlayStation 5. So it's only a matter of time before that happens, before the physical market is completely dead. Probably give another 5 years max. That'll make games even more difficult to keep and preserve. And I think if subscription services like Game Pass become a mainstream thing, then the problem is going to be just 10 times worse than it is right now. That's why I advocate so much against these subscription services that are popping up now in video games. They're terrible. But I already made a whole video discussing that, so I'm not going to rehash those points. But I'm worried, guys. The things I've been seeing over the past decade or so have not been good when it comes to trying to preserve these games. And it's important because even if a game is bad, you should be like, oh, this game sucks, why would you want to replay it? Because there are a lot of games that are terrible, and that's the reason why they got delisted, because nobody bought them and they were not successful. The company went down, they went bankrupt, whatever the hell. It's still important because they're still a part of history, and history can be both good and bad. Like, in real life, we've had plenty of dark times in history, plenty of terrible, atrocious things have happened, but they should still be remembered by people. And I think the same thing can be said about shitty games. Remember the angry video game nerd, him playing through all those shitty ass games? It was so much entertainment, and it's fun playing bad games. They can be so bad that they're good in some kind of way. Like, you never know if someone's gonna like something or not. So, in an ideal world, every single game should still be playable no matter what, whether it's an online game or a single player game, one of the best games ever made or one of the worst of all time. It doesn't matter. So, we'll see what happens in the future, but I don't think it's looking very good at all. Let me know what you guys think.